Welcome to South Carolina Social Studies. Today we are going to be studying South Carolina Social Studies Standard 8.4-3. So please make sure you have your notes ready to fill in those blanks. We're talking about the road to secession or the road to South Carolina leaving or withdrawing from the United States Union that they were a part of. The essential question for the day is, what were the key issues that led to South Carolina's secession from the Union? We've already spoken about a couple before, so you need to go back in your notes from last week and pull those out. Our standard is analyze key issues that led to South Carolina's secession from the Union, including the nullification controversy and John C. Calhoun, the extension of slavery and the compromises over westward extension of slavery, the Kansas-Nebraska Act and Dred Scott decision, and the election of 1860. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act was also the result of westward expansion and North and South economic competition. So you had the North and South ready to move into Kansas. The Kansas Territory was in the northern part of the Louisiana Territory. So according to the Missouri Compromise, it could not be a slave state. Again, if you look at that map that's on the board, the Kansas and Nebraska Territory was above the 3630 parallel line on that map, which is the Missouri Compromise line. So it could not be a slave state. However, some politicians wanted to build a railroad across the country through Kansas, so they needed to get Southern support. So in order to be able to pass through with their slaves or to do something like that, they'd have to have the support of the South. Southerners, especially Jefferson Davis, wanted to build a transcontinental railroad on a southern route from New Orleans. The Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise. So when you repeal something, that means you take it back. So Jefferson Davis, who ended up being the president of the Confederate States of America, wanted to build a railroad across the United States, starting from New Orleans all the way out to the West Coast. So in order to do so, he needed the Kansas-Nebraska Territory to become available for slavery. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed that 3630 line, and it also allowed people in these territories to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery within their borders through popular sovereignty. Again, we talked about popular sovereignty before, and popular sovereignty is basically letting the people decide whether they want slavery or not in that territory. So again, the Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed or took back the Missouri Compromise, which was that 3630 line on the map that said slavery could not be above that line, and it allowed people in the territories to decide for themselves whether or not they were going to allow slavery. This presented a huge problem, and the North was not very happy about this particular act. All right, so in order to affect the vote, that was not necessarily the way that the popular sovereignty concept was supposed to have worked. Northern abolitionists and Southern slave owners temporarily moved into the Kansas Territory. So these people packed up their bags, moved into Kansas so that the people, whoever had the most people basically, if you had more abolitionists than Southern slave owners in Kansas, then Kansas would have become a free state. If you had more slave owners than abolitionists, then it would have become a slave state. So these people picked up their belongings, moved to Kansas, and it was a mess. So soon the fighting led people to call the area Bleeding Kansas because there was so much fighting going on over the issue of whether or not slavery was going to be allowed in that territory. There were even some fights in Congress where a senator got caned. So if you look up Bleeding Kansas online, you'll find the picture of a Senator Charles Sumner who got caned in Congress. Like at his desk, he got beat with a cane from another congressman because of this issue dealing with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Some Northern Whigs and Northern Democrats who were appalled at the violence joined the Free Soil Party, or they were those who opposed the expansion of slavery, and the Liberty Party, or the abolitionists, to form a new political party called the Republicans. So this is where you see the birth of the modern-day Republican Party, right here based on the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Again, some Northern Whigs and Northern Democrats who disliked all the violence that was going on over the Kansas-Nebraska Act joined the Free Soil Party and the Liberty Party to form a new political party that were called the Republicans. That's very important for you to know. I know I didn't leave it as a space on your notes, but you need to know where the Republican Party came from. This is not the Democratic Republicans that we were talking about before. They were known from this point on as the Democrats. But this is the Republican Party, or the Party of Lincoln, that went through the Civil War, and they came from Northern Democrats and Northern Whigs who disliked the violence associated with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They joined that Free Soil Party, or those who wanted free soil, or they did not want the expansion of slavery, and the Liberty Party, which were the abolitionists, to form a new political party called the Republicans. All right, as we continue, the Dred Scott decision. Now, you see this picture of this man on the side. Dred Scott, we've talked briefly about him. But the Dred Scott decision was an attempt by the Supreme Court to end controversy over the role of free states in determining the status of the enslaved. So Dred Scott was a man who actually got moved to a free state by his master. His master died, so he sued for his freedom because he was in a free state. Dred Scott was a slave, again, whose master had taken him into free territory. So with the help of other Northern abolitionists, Scott sued his master for freedom, claiming he was once free, he was always free. So if you're on free soil, I'm always free. The Supreme Court basically gave a slap in the face to abolitionists, and African Americans. Their decision said that African Americans were not citizens of the United States, even if they had been born in the United States, and therefore they had no right to sue in the Supreme Court. I'll say that again. The Supreme Court decided that African Americans were not citizens of the United States, even if they had been born in the United States, and therefore had no right to sue in the Supreme Court. They also said that African Americans had no rights at all. Again, they said African Americans had no rights at all. The court went on to rule that Scott was property, or he was saying that all African American slaves are property, and that the Constitution of the United States protects the rights of the owners of property from having that property taken away by the government. So the Dred Scott decision, the court further ruled that Congress could not pass measures or laws such as the Missouri Compromise or the Kansas-Nebraska Act that limited the expansion of slavery in the territories. So you could not say that you can be a free state or a slave state. All over the United States was open and free for that, is what they were saying. Such acts were ruled unconstitutional because they denied slave owners the right to take their property anywhere they wanted. The Dred Scott decision did not end the controversy over slavery, however. Instead, Northerners claimed that the court could deny them the right to outlaw slavery in their states and would end the idea of popular sovereignty, which would limit democracy. So basically, they were saying that the court was saying that the people don't have a right to decide. So that becomes a larger issue as well. South Carolinians applauded the decision and accepted the Supreme Court's ruling as the final word on the issue. Of course they would, right? Debates over the Dred Scott decision led Republican Abraham Lincoln to national prominence and further split the Democratic. So Abraham Lincoln became a candidate, or he started debating a man named Stephen Douglas, who was for popular sovereignty, but Abraham Lincoln was for free soil. Okay? So throughout the country, there were all kind of protests. So there was a man named John Brown. He was an abolitionist, and he had a raid on the federal arsenal. The arsenal is where they store the weapons, at Harper's Ferry. And the publicity that surrounded the trial further heightened sectionalism by stoking the fears of Southern slave owners that abolitionists and free slaves would be a danger to their lives as well as their livelihoods. So if you want to know a little bit more about John Brown, I suggest you find a video on YouTube about John Brown, or there might be one there on iTunes. So many Southerners felt or thought that many Southerners had also come to believe that their interests would be gravely threatened by the election of a Northern Republican candidate. So you had all those people that got together and formed the Republican Party who were not in support of expanding slavery to the West. So the Southerners felt like their interests would be threatened by the election of a Northern Republican candidate. The election of 1860 prompted South Carolina to secede from the Union, and Republican Abraham Lincoln campaigned on a free soil or idea that slavery should not be allowed to expand into the territories. Lincoln was not an abolitionist in 1860, but a free soiler. I'll say that again. He was not for the abolition of slavery, but he was a free soiler. So he felt like slavery should not be allowed to expand into the territories. He didn't say abolish slavery. Lincoln won the election with electoral votes from the North. The South and the border states split their votes among several candidates. So they had a lot of people running for president, basically. And Abraham Lincoln, much like Donald Trump, won the Electoral College. After Lincoln's election, however, South Carolina called a special convention and signed the Articles of Secession, claiming that the rights of South Carolinians had not been and would not be protected by the federal government. 6 other southern states seceded soon after. So you'll find out more about that once you complete your assignments.